Hey everyone, you are listening to the 9th episode in the ClassofHC 2016 Election Clapback podcast series. This series was inspired by a good book that I read this summer and was provoked by a lot of the foolishness we have all seen in this year's presidential election campaign. I am Deji, curator of the Class of Hope and Change documentary. You can find out more information about that project at ClassofHC.com. Last time we talked about a period in the U.S. when America was high on greatness, the 1980s. This episode will talk about a period I described as America at great.com, the 90s. If you're listening to this Election Clapback series for the first time, thanks for checking it out. Like I said, the series was provoked by a good book that I read called Economix, spelled Economix, by Michael Goodwin and Dan Burr. It's a comic book version of U.S. history with a focus on our economy. Really good explanation of how we got to this point. I don't know the authors, I'm not getting paid to promote their book, but I like giving credit where it's due, and this book definitely provoked this series. So check out the link in the bio if you want more information about that. So we pick up in the part of the book that describes the American economy in 92, the year Bill Clinton was elected president. So despite successfully removing Saddam Hussein's Iraqi army from the country of Kuwait and winning the first Gulf War a year earlier in 1991, President George H.W. Bush was still not popular enough to keep his job. Unfortunately for him, the elder President Bush had made a strong promise to the American people when he got elected in 1988.
I'm the one who will not raise taxes. My opponent now says he'll raise them as a last resort or a third resort. But when a politician talks like that, you know that's one resort he'll be checking into. And my opponent won't rule out raising taxes, but I will, and the Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no. And they'll push, and I'll say no, and they'll push again, and I'll say to them, read my lips. No new taxes.
It was a promise he couldn't keep. And so, 4 years later, Bill Clinton reminded the American people of this.
The George Bush promise.
Read my lips. No new.
Then he gave us the second biggest tax increase in American history. Bush increased the gas tax by 56%. Can we afford 4 more years? Bill Clinton, a different kind of Democrat. As governor, Arkansas has the second lowest tax burden in the country. Balanced 12 budgets. You don't have to read his lips. Read his record. Clinton Gore. For people. For a change.
The book describes some of the important people who controlled government actions about the economy. But one thing that stood out to me, the first thing President Clinton did in his first budget after he got elected, the budget of 1993, was to raise the income tax rate on people making the most money in the U.S. The second thing he focused on was the U.S. healthcare system. So partnering with his wife, Hillary Clinton, they tried to create a program that would deal with the two biggest problems with how our healthcare system works. The first problem is that our insurance is run by private, often publicly traded corporations. Remember back in episode 2, and if you haven't checked that out, you can listen to it on either SoundCloud or YouTube. Back in episode 2, we talked about the role of corporations, how they work a little bit, the history of them. And we know that corporations' first purpose for existing is to make money for the people who own them, the shareholders. In episode 8 last time, we talked about how in the 80s, the American economy moved to focusing a lot on the stock prices of corporations, much more so than it had in the years past. And so a lot of the insurance companies that run and manage our healthcare are part of this process. So the book talks about the fact that's going to create some problems for working people in the U.S. Because if insurance companies are trying to make the most money, then that means a couple things. One, they need to take in more money in monthly premiums. That's the money that comes out of your paycheck or that you pay every month for your health insurance. That's money coming into an insurance company. And the way you make money is that when you collect money, you try to spend as little as possible. So spending as little as possible for a healthcare insurance company means not allowing people to sign up who are going to need healthcare that they have to pay for. So by not allowing people to sign up in the first place, due to what we call pre-existing conditions, if you were of a certain age, if you weren't healthy, if you had a certain type of illnesses or challenges, and you were going to cost them a lot of money, then they just wouldn't let you sign up for healthcare insurance, and then they wouldn't have to pay for anything. That's one way to save money. Another way to save money is to reject the claims of people who signed up for your program, paid their premiums, their monthly bill, and went to the doctor or got prescriptions. So in order to decide who could sign up for healthcare and which doctor's visits and prescriptions to pay for, that required healthcare companies to hire people. So on one hand, healthcare corporations could say they were creating jobs for some Americans, and then on the other hand, those jobs were limiting the kind of health insurance that other Americans could get. That's not good.
Hello, this is Hillary Clinton. I want to thank you for letting me speak with you about an issue that is central to our children's future and critical in our fight to restore this nation's economy, solving our nation's health care crisis. The message is simple. It's time to bring about fundamental change, control our nation's soaring health care costs, and provide security for American families again. Since we first came to Washington, I've been chairing the President's Task Force on Health Care, and every day I have been lucky to hear from people all over the country. But I think the person who best summed up the situation we face was a doctor I met recently at St. Agnes Hospital in Philadelphia. He said to me, "You know the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, Mrs. Clinton, the system's broke and it's time to fix it."
Another major focus during the 90s of the federal government was welfare reform. Remember, we talked about in episodes 5, 6, and 7, basically covering the 1930s to the 1960s, the federal government in particular was starting all sorts of programs and passing all sorts of laws to try to deal with the economic and financial and working lives and trying to make lives better for at least many Americans. So that idea, as we talked about last episode, for people like President Reagan and folks who were his supporters, their idea was that people, especially poor people, well, especially poor black people, were too dependent on government for benefits. And so the government shouldn't be spending everyone else's tax dollars to support them. Somehow their thinking did not extend to the welfare given to large corporations, organized interest groups, and wealthy people. So in the mid-1990s, the federal government started to pass welfare-to-work laws in order to reduce the amount of money that the federal government was spending helping Americans who needed it.
Welfare as we know it is now history. President Clinton today signed the legislation that ends a government commitment made 61 years ago of federal aid to the nation's poorest. An historic opportunity for improvement, said the president today. A moment of shame, said some of the new law's critics, who see millions of Americans, especially children, being forced into poverty. At the White House, ABC's Britt Hume.
In the third bill signing of the week, the president redeemed his long-standing promise to end the current welfare system. But this event was less a celebration than an explanation of why the president was signing a bill he said is flawed and many in his party think is disastrous.
We can change what is wrong, but let's not obscure the fundamental purpose of the welfare provisions of this legislation, which are good and solid and which can give us at least the chance to end the terrible, almost physical isolation of huge numbers of poor people and their children from the rest of mainstream America. We have to do that.
The bill ends the federal guarantee of cash assistance to the poor and largely turns welfare over to the states, while cutting the growth of federal welfare spending $55 billion over 6 years. There would be a 5-year lifetime limit on welfare benefits, with nearly all recipients required to find work within 2 years. There are also cuts in the growth of child nutrition spending and sharp restrictions on welfare benefits for the children of legal immigrants. The president has said he'll try to get Congress to repeal those two provisions, and he's asked the Justice Department about ways to delay the cutoff of benefits to immigrants. He's also considering proposing tax breaks for businesses who hire people coming off welfare. But none of that prevented advocacy groups who have been his strong allies from protesting against the bill and him outside the White House.
We won't lift a finger or raise a penny to re-elect a president who would plunge millions more people into poverty.
If the president has to live without the support of the National Organization of Women in the coming election, he'll just have to pay that price.
The White House clearly thinks that price will be offset by the political benefit of this bill. But it would have been nice not to have to sign it just before his party's convention. Congressional Republicans, knowing that, had waited until now to send him the bill. Britt Hume, ABC News, the White House.
So this law claimed to help people by supporting them while they tried to work, even if their jobs did not pay enough for them to live on.
That's Barbara Ehrenreich, well-known essayist, probably one of the best journalists in the country. It's 1998, Jack, a moment of unparalleled prosperity in America. What the chairman of the Federal Reserve called irrational exuberance. The Clinton administration's welfare reforms have herded millions of Americans into the low-wage workforce. But how does one prosper or even survive if one makes $6 or $7 an hour? And Barbara's trying to find out how the trick is done. So for the last year, she's been working at low-wage jobs, living in cheap rooms, traveling around the country, working as a domestic maid, as a Walmart associate, as a waitress.
Coffee? And Coke?
Oh, thanks a lot.
Barbara, this is Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Nice to meet you.
Jack just graduated from Yale.
Oh.
Goldman's made him an offer, but he doesn't know whether he wants to be in the investment banking business. So I'm taking him on the rounds, introducing him to people in other professions.
Well, I hope you're not thinking of waitressing.
Why, has it been that tough?
Does he know what I'm doing, what I'm up to here?
I told him.
Oh, well, you know, you can't feel too sorry for me because I'm really a journalist. I'm doing this briefly. But one of the very humbling things for me has been to learn really that there are no unskilled jobs. All jobs take skill and intelligence and experience. They're hard. From the first day I started working here, I've been running. And first I was running around after Gail. She's another waitress here.
Okay, Barb, can you take the pancakes to 63?
She'd be explaining how to do things and also telling me about her troubles. She's been living in a van.
So I ended up living in my truck out here in the parking lot from like March to July.
She works full-time, but she can't afford an apartment or anything regular like that. But anyway, it's so much. It's overwhelming. I can't even think about the fact that I may be too tired to get out to the parking lot by the end of the day.
So what was the end result? I mean, can you get by, in other words?
Not in the jobs I've had. Right now, I'm already $100 behind the rent that I need to pay for my half-size trailer in the trailer park. So, you know, even living in a trailer park seems to me a little ambitious at this moment.
All was not gloomy for Americans in the 1990s, especially in the mid to late 1990s. America was great for a whole new group of people.
What up, Bob? Goes on, baby. Everything is all good in the hood.
Yeah. It's the headquarters right here, kid.
Here I am. You're on TV Raps. We up in this piece. Yeah. This is it. Bad Boy Entertainment.
Bad Boy Entertainment, no doubt.
Cool. So what we gonna do, baby? Where's Craig and Biggie and all that?
We're gonna kick it. They in the back. You know what I'm saying? They in the conference room writing some rhymes right now. But we're gonna go in the back, kick it.
Okay.
So I'm gonna show you my office. Come on.
Let's go. Bad Boy himself, Puffy.
Come over here.
Yes.
My little lab right here, you know, where I cut my deals and all that. Got my little headset so I ain't gotta have the phone picked up to my head. I don't wanna hurt my arm.
Cool. That's like, you know, when you be in Hollywood, all those agents have these. They be like, you know, conversating and
I'm
things
just
like that.
living out a dream, you know what I'm saying? Young black man, just living out a dream. So you
blowing up the spot,
trying
right?
to do my thing here.
That's interesting. There's a lot of people Puffy's age wanna grab this mic and rap, but Puffy, you wanted to do other things, and you're doing a lot of them. Now, I remember back about 4 or 5 years ago when you first started making your name on the scene, you used to promote some hardcore hip-hop parties at a club called the Red Zone.
Yeah, it's Daddy's house. It started out as hardcore, then because the scene was so real and so hip-hop, you know what I'm saying, it's so underground, it started crossing over a little bit. Then, you know, when Fashion Week was in town, all the models up there, Russell was up in there, you was up in there, a lot of the movie stars, Robert De Niro every now and then.
You know what I'm saying?
You know, all
and then you realized you had the
actors.
potential to parlay, and then you started working with Andre Harrell. Tell us about
No,
that.
at the time I was working with Andre Harrell, but
Right.
he wasn't paying me enough, so I had to promote parties on the side, which was all good.
Right,
you know what I'm saying? It was all lovely.
Guy has an exciting, brand new double CD album. Tell them about the title and some of the people you got down.
I like that exciting.
It's exciting.
You was good in school. You got like that vocabulary.
Yeah, you like the
exciting.
double CD. It's called All Eyes on Me. That's how I feel it is. You know, I got the police watching me, the feds. I got the females that want to charge me with false charges and sue me and all that. I got the females that like me. I got the jealous homeboys, and I got the homies that roll with me. Everybody's looking to see what I'm gonna do now. So All Eyes on Me. We got Faith on the album. We got Dog Pound, Snoop, Roger Troutman, George Clinton, Nate Dogg, Dre, Jodeci, Method Man, Redman, E40, The Click, C-Mo, Nate Dogg, Danny Boy, everybody.
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody.
All kinds of
Richie
flavors.
Rich. We got everybody from the Bay to New York, everywhere. We just really trying to put it down. I want this to be the best hip-hop album ever. It's the fastest recorded album in history of rap music. It's the longest running album in history of rap music. It's the first double CD, and it's on the dude that put it down the most. Now, when we gonna try to hear this, man? Because I want to hear something. Because Suge don't want me to let her right now. But I'm gonna have to sneak me some of them phone numbers you got. All right, cool. Y'all stay down. Mind y'all business.
Rappers weren't the only people doing well during this period.
How much money, and forgive me if this is embarrassing, but I think people are fascinated by money, wealth, and power, you know. How much are you worth totally? You're the Trump businesses, the Trump beauty pageants, the Trump, roller rinks, whatever the hell you got, I don't know. How much is that empire worth?
You know, I really don't know. There have been a lot of different estimates, and I really don't know what I'm worth. It depends when you take values of Trump Tower and all the different buildings that I built.
It's always in flux, isn't it, really?
It's always in flux. And especially me, I love leverage. I love borrowing. And when you like to borrow, you can go up and down. I've had days where I'm worth $4 billion and days where I'm worth minus $900 million. That's a big swing.
Yeah,
I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, I was probably worth minus $900 million. And today it's worked out where it's very positive.
Now, what would you do to turn that around? If you're down...
Work very hard.
You're down nearly $1 billion. How do you turn that around?
Well, times turn it around, work turns it around, intelligence turns it around. I mean, there was a time where I sort of lost my focus a little bit. I wasn't working like I used to.
Put yourself on a budget?
And the market.
Get yourself on a budget?
You put yourself on a budget.
That's right.
You put yourself on a budget.
Sure. Now, it seems to me that a guy in your position who can sit here and honestly say, I'm not sure what I'm worth, but it's a pretty good situation. A guy in your position then has an incumbency, a responsibility to do something nice for other people every day of his life.
I agree.
Do you do that?
I do.
Can you, without embarrassing yourself, can you give me an idea of something nice you've done for somebody recently?
Well, I married Marla, and now I'm giving her a big settlement. That's not what you had in mind.
Oh, man.
That's not what you had in mind, is it?
Oh, man. See, now, if I had said that, people would have booed me.
I know. It's
no. But you know what I'm getting at. Do you do good things?
I do.
Nice
I give a lot of money away, and I love doing it, to be honest. I think we have an obligation to do that.
Yeah.
And I give a lot of millions and millions of dollars away to charities and different things.
Yeah. Now, do you like talking about that, or you'd rather not talk about that?
I don't like talking about it. I usually don't talk about it. And people don't like writing about it because it's not my image. They don't like that image.
They like to think of you as kind of a punk, kind of a sneering
they like to think
punk.
as a bad guy.
Yeah, bad guy.
They like a bad guy better.
Yeah,
they like the bad guy image.
In fact, things were so great for so many Americans that by the end of the 90s, some reports started to say that this run of American greatness would never end.
When the ball drops on the year 2000, it will be a momentous event for the world and for the U.S. economy, which is closing in on its longest expansion ever. The decade has been marked by strong growth, the lowest unemployment in a generation, and yet remarkably little inflation. Well, tonight we ring in a special Millennium series here on Moneyline, The New Economy. Is it a boom without end? Over the next 2 weeks, we'll cross the country trying to answer a key question. Has the 1990s boom shattered old assumptions about how the economy works and how fast it can grow? We begin tonight with an in-depth look at the debate and at what's at stake. Peter Viles has the story.
Would everybody else turn off their cell phone?
It's first-year economics at New York University, and Professor Mark Lieberman is talking Wall Street.
But the question is, how long can amzn.com's revenues continue to grow?
His students are mostly freshmen who came of age during an unprecedented era of prosperity. They have no experience with a world marked by runaway inflation, high unemployment, or market crashes, and some think it's a boom without end.
I have a number of students who fully expect to be billionaires by the time they hit their 30s.
But as Lieberman teaches economic rules, some say those rules are being rewritten. It's a question now being debated in classrooms, in boardrooms, and here on Wall Street. Have technology, globalization, and free trade come together to create a truly new economy, one that allows for strong growth and little inflation? The market's future and the nation's continued prosperity depend on the answer. Since 1991, the economy has expanded in what's about to break the record as America's longest boom. If anything, the economy is speeding up, going way faster since 1995 than once thought possible, without sparking inflation. Low inflation has led to low interest rates, an ideal environment for stocks to soar.
I'm 2, 3, 10 down, 2 down.
And soar they did, the Dow nearly quadrupling since the expansion began. The question, though, has the economy changed for good?
That was from 1999. And we all know what was coming around the corner for America in 2001 and in the years after that. And we know from previous episodes in this Election Clapback series that there have been many times in the past when Americans thought things would be great forever. And those periods were soon followed by periods of time that were anything but great. One Election Clapback question that I have is, what are the kinds of things we should do as a society? What are the kinds of things that we expect the government to do when things are great for a lot of people? What do we do when some or even many people are doing well, while people like the ones in Barbara's undercover reporting are still struggling? So, while many Americans were enjoying life in the 90s, some of the same problems we're talking about today were problems 20 years ago.
I would like to start by thanking Jim and Sarah Brady for the many years that they have taken out of their lives for such a worthy cause, and they have done it because it is something that they believe so strongly in and that they know will save lives. I also like to thank President Clinton for his leadership role in taking a stand and urging the Congress, if you'll send it to me, I'll sign it. And I thank him for his leadership in that. I'm an ordinary citizen. I'm not an activist, and I'm not in the political arena. But I decided I had to get involved because of something that happened in my life. On April 24th, 1990, 2 police officers came to where I was working and informed me that my husband had been shot and killed while eating lunch in a food court in a mall in Atlanta. The man who killed my husband had just been released from a mental institution the day before. A waiting period deterred him from buying a gun in the city of Atlanta. However, he went to a neighboring county and bought the gun that killed my husband. The Brady bill could have saved my husband's life if there had just been a waiting period and a background check. I think the waiting period is important for 2 reasons. It allows people to cool off from their anger and from whatever is disturbing them at the time. And it also allows for information to get into the system so when they do a background check, it is accurate. The release papers on the man who killed my husband was not even written up until after the shooting, a day and a half later after he was released. That's why I feel a waiting period is still so important and part of the Brady bill. I can't bring my husband back, but I do know that the Brady bill is going to save other people's lives, the lives of people that I love and care for, my friends and my family. It could save their lives. I know from my own experience that the Brady bill will help stop people from losing members of their families to senseless violence. It will work. But the fight isn't over. There's people in Congress who want to weaken the Brady bill, to have the sunset provision lowered from 5 to 3 years, regardless of if there's an instant background check or not. We need to stay involved. We need to stay active. We need to keep the pressure on our members of Congress and let them know how important of an issue that this is. The Brady Bill is not the solution to the problem, but it is the first step in a multiple problem-oriented society that we have. We need rational, practical legislation to reduce the violence in our country. This is an important day for me and for all Americans, not only because the President is signing the Brady Bill, but because it shows that the system works. It shows that average people can make a difference. Thank you.
Sound familiar? This law that was passed in 1993 is still in effect and led to the creation of the FBI's National Criminal Background Check System for people purchasing firearms at federally licensed gun stores. The debate about whether we should have any laws or rules for buying and owning a gun, what kinds of laws and rules they should be. This debate wasn't the only one from the 90s that will sound familiar to you today.
Mr. Chairman, let me begin with a profound remark. 2 + 2 = 4. In other words, there is a logical and rational process called cause and effect. In terms of Newtonian physics, that means that every action causes an equal and opposite reaction. In other words, fellow members of the House, there are reasons why things happen, as controversial as that statement may be. A farmer neglects to tend and care for his fields, it is likely that that crop will fail. A company neglects to invest in research and development, it is likely that that company will not be profitable. In a similar way, a society which neglects, which oppresses, and which disdains a very significant part of its population, which leaves them hungry, impoverished, unemployed, uneducated, and utterly without hope, will, through cause and effect, create a population which is bitter, which is angry, which is violent, and a society which is crime-ridden. And that is the case in America, and it is the case in other countries throughout the world. Mr. Chairman, how do we talk about the very serious crime problem in America without mentioning that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world by far, with 22% of our children in poverty and 5 million kids hungry today? Do you think maybe that might have some relationship to crime? How do we talk about crime when this Congress is prepared this year to spend 11 times more for the military than for education? When 21% of our kids drop out of high school, when a recent study told us that twice as many young workers now earn poverty wages as 10 years ago, when the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider, and when the rate of poverty continues to grow. Do you think maybe that might have some relationship to crime? Mr. Chairman, it is my firm belief that clearly there are people in our society who are horribly violent, who are deeply sick and sociopathic, and clearly these people must be put behind bars in order to protect society from them. But it is also my view that through the neglect of our government and through a grossly irrational set of priorities, we are dooming today tens of millions of young people to a future of bitterness, misery, hopelessness, drugs, crime, and violence. And, Mr. Speaker, all the jails in the world, and we already imprison more people per capita than any other country, and all of the executions. Can I ask for one more moment, please?
I give the gentleman 30 seconds. We'll run.
All the jails in the world and all the executions in the world will not make that situation right. We can either educate or electrocute. We can create meaningful jobs, rebuilding our society, or we can build more jails. Mr. Speaker, let us create a society of hope and compassion, not one of hate and vengeance. Thank you.
That speech was made on the floor of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. in 1994. Sound familiar? Let's continue.
I'm Bernard Parks, Councilman 8th District, City of Los Angeles, and in 1992, I was a deputy chief within the LAPD, working in what we call Central Bureau.
We are getting word this evening of some rock throwing by youths in south central Los Angeles, perhaps in reaction to today's verdicts in the Rodney King beating.
In the helicopter, you're able to see what's happening. There's too many calls and not enough aircraft down here. You can see that
they are beginning to definitely deploy into those areas now to try to get a handle on the violence and the looting and all that has gone on overnight. 130.
The big battle inside of the LAPD was people trying to determine where they came out on the side of whether it was appropriate or inappropriate using force on Rodney King. And there was a lot of tension around that.
If this guy got back up, he was going to take my gun away from me, or there was going to be a shooting, and I was doing everything I could to keep him down on the ground.
And I thought Officer Powell was out of control then.
And so what are you trying to do?
Stop Officer Powell.
There were those who thought, hey, what happened to Rodney King, quote, he deserved it. He was running from the police. If he hadn't done that, the police wouldn't have done what they did. And then there were others like myself that said, this is inappropriate. No matter what happened before the camera came on, you couldn't justify what you saw on the tape. It was the singular most important piece of evidence that the public was able to point at and say, for decades and decades, we've been talking about being abused by the police. The police often didn't take our complaints, and when they did, they ignored them because they never had enough justification. So this particular piece of video validated in thousands of people's minds that this has been going on for a long time, and it validated that this is how the police treats the community, particularly the black community. When you think about the time between Rodney King beating and the trial and the eventual outcome of the trial, there's literally months have passed. Most everyone that was talked to said there was such a distance in time that most of the people's feelings would be diffused. Not many people thought this was going to erupt.
The officers are trying to hold him back, and they were storming in there.
The community will drive the changes that they believe are necessary for the police department to pay attention to. Now, do you ever get to the point of saying it's all done and we've solved it and it will never happen again? I don't think so. What you hope is that you have continual relationships in the community, that you have relationships that are built on a strong foundation. So if something occurs in the community that is negative involving the police, the community will have enough confidence that it will be handled properly. And if that confidence isn't there, you're going to have people looking for other ways to express themselves.
Sound familiar? I could keep going for hours. For me, especially because this presidential election is so connected to this particular decade of the 90s and what many people did or said back then, one of my election clapback questions to the American people is, what have we learned? Are we any better at this human project of democracy than we were 20 years ago? Are the ideas, solutions, and explanations that you're hearing today on your TV any further evolved? Are they any better than what we've heard in this episode and in the 8 episodes that I've done in this series before this one? The election clapback question to each of you is, what can you do today, this month, next year, that improves on the lessons and experiences that we've covered in this series? What can your family, your friends, your coworkers, your community do to engage the issues that might help make this country better? Whose voices do we need to hear more from? Whose voices have we heard enough from already and need to hear less from? And there's also a question throughout these 9 episodes that I've tried to raise in different ways, which is, who is an American? Who gets a say in what happens in this country? For that matter, Who gets a say in what happens to them by other Americans in this country? And lastly, what is the message that we're trying to send to the next generation? Not just for your kids, not just for the kids you know, but for all the kids in this country. We'll end with this thought.
Well, it is shaping them, I think, in a not good way. And one of the messages you want to send is that parents are the most important people in children's lives, and we parents have got to communicate and be there for our kids. It's even more important in this era of AIDS, of violence, of teenage parenthood too early, of all of these messages that they get from outside the culture, so that it is so important for parents to say, despite all of these changes, there are some things, honesty, morality, helping other people, that don't change regardless of the cultural changes, regardless of what our political leaders may say.
But here comes Marian Wright Edelman, a known liberal.
Known liberal. In some things, I'm deeply conservative. I hate these labels,
I know
Charlie.
You do.
Okay?
But here you come, and conservatives are saying, all right, that's what we've been saying for a long time. Family values, family values, family values. And I know politics is not the game that we're talking about, but in a sense, in America, family values seem to have been identified more with conservative rhetoric than liberal rhetoric.
See, I don't buy that. That's the other reason I wrote this book, because I want them to know that I come from a tradition of strong families, of family values, of family rituals, and of people who live what they preach, not talk, not judge. My faith tells me not to say, that poor families or single parents are less good than anybody else. My faith tells me to help them, not to judge them. God judges, okay? Right. And so one of the reasons I come out of a deep tradition of self-help. Black folk have been helping themselves all of their lives.
Because that's all they had to depend on.
Because they couldn't look to anybody else, and so don't preach to me about what I should do for myself. That's why I started the Children's Defense Fund. That's why I went to Mississippi. That's why I try to do the service, and I believe very deeply in service and in family values. I am deeply conservative in many ways. I'm moderate on some things. I'm liberal on some things. I'm radical. We need to stop this labeling, because children don't fit into any one ideology, and all of us have got to be for families. But secondly, I understand, and this is where I differ with the right, that it's not enough to preach, and it's not enough to sort of be against the hot sins. You also got to help
hot sins
parents.
Of behavioral sins?
Behavioral sins, we've also got to help people who want to have values. They got to have something to eat. It's hard to have strong values if you don't have a shelter over your head, and you don't have any supports in your community.
You're saying that the fundamental needs in terms of whether you had enough nutrition and whether you had enough shelter and whether you had enough love is every bit as important as to these sort of hot sins, like how many, what your sexual conduct was yesterday afternoon?
I'm for moral conduct, okay, but I also understand that hungry people and homeless people and ignorant people and people who are uneducated people or people who can't make ends meet have a hard time sort of understanding about being preached to and what they ought to do. The fact is this country is hypocritical. We talk family values, and yet we don't support families. We oppose parental leave policies, okay? We oppose children's allowances, as most other industrialized nations do. We don't even give our families basic health insurance so that their children can get care when they get sick. Those are our family values. We don't even provide for jobs and economic security. Our young families of all races, and it's not just poor or black children who are in trouble in this country, it's all of our kids, but young families of all races trying to get off the ground today, having a heck of a hard time because of the decline in wages, the lack of jobs, the lack of their ability to buy a house, and so we really need to start putting up rather than talking.
Why is it that in America, in terms of infant mortality, in terms of a whole series of indicia of how a nation state takes care of its children, how a nation takes care of its children, we don't score as well as we do in terms of per capita income, as well as we do in terms of percentage of natural resource, all those kinds of things? Why? Is it a function of leadership? Is it a function of caring? Is it a function of spiritual connection? What?
I think it's a little bit of all of those things, and that is the question we need to be asking each of ourselves and of our political leaders this year. Why is it that the wealthiest nation on the earth can't do better than 23 other nations in keeping our infants alive? Why is it when UNICEF is making great progress in getting children immunized in third world countries, our non-white infants lag in their immunization rates behind 69 other nations, even when we know that every dollar we invest saves $10 on the other end? Why is it we're the only industrialized nation?
You mean if we spend more money today in terms of a child who was born 10 minutes ago will save a lot of money we'll have to spend at the other end of their life.
We don't invest in prevention in this country. We know how to prevent diseases. We know how to immunize kids. We know if we put $1 in immunization, we'll save $10 on the other end. We know that Head Start works.
Right.
Every dollar we put in saves almost $6 on the other end. Why don't we do it? Why do we let children die?
Why?
That's a profound note to end on. Why do we let children die? Interested in continuing the conversation? You can reach out to us at ClassofHC on all the social media channels. Please use the hashtag Election Clapback when you respond. We definitely like to hear from your ideas. And as always, there are more perspectives and many more stories and voices that existed during this time. And if you have some voices and perspectives that you want included that you think are important and relevant and matter to you in this moment, definitely feel free to share those. You can also send us an email at ClassofHC@gmail.com. Looking for people of goodwill and good sense. Thanks for listening. Have a great one.